Good afternoon, and welcome to the Metropolitan Club once again. I'm Mo Wright, Chairman of our Board of Trustees and President at Raymond Consulting. Thank you all for being here. We're excited to get this conversation underway today. Today's forum, the ABCs of Charter Schools, is supported by the Columbus Dispatch. Please join me in thanking the Columbus Dispatch for their support of today's forum and all that they do. And just to note, we are going to be doing a part 2 to the Charter Schools Forum featuring Ohio Auditor Dave Yost sometime in the upcoming year. So please stay tuned for details on that forum, but we do want you to join us for that conversation as well. As we know, during recent CMC Program Committee discussions, it's become apparent that charter schools in Ohio are generally not very well understood. We see them frequently in the news. We know that they come up oftentimes for the wrong reasons. And so we want you to consider that they are public entities, they receive public funding, and they're tremendously diverse in their management and their staffing, their curriculum, their teaching formats, their student bodies, and perhaps most importantly, their academic outcomes. Charter schools exist in Ohio to provide alternatives to mainstream public schools. Today, we look forward to hearing more about the why, the how, the what of charter schools from our very knowledgeable speakers. Now, just to note, Chad Aldis of the Fordham Institute was unable to join us last minute due to personal reasons. So here we welcome in his place the Research Director of the Thomas Fordham Institute, Aaron Churchill. You can give Aaron a round of applause. President and CEO of the Ohio Alliance of Public Charter Schools, Darlene Chambers. Principal of the Arts College Preparatory Academy, a charter school here in Columbus, Tony Gatto. And our host and moderator, reporter for Columbus Dispatch, Cathy Candisky. I'm sorry. Cathy, the podium is yours.
Thank you. So we want to know what we're going to back up a little bit from what's been in the headlines, I guess, and talk a little bit more about what charter schools are. And I guess the first thing I'm hoping to clarify is what's the difference between a charter school and a community school? It's the same thing. It took me a while to figure that out, but they're the absolutely same thing. The school, we here in Ohio, we call them community schools. I think nationally they're more known as charter schools, but they're the same thing. They're public, nonprofit, non-sectarian schools that are privately operated under the authority of an authorizer or a sponsor, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. They get about $7,000 per pupil in tax dollars, but they're privately operated by different groups, and we'll hear a little bit more about that as well. Ohio's charter school law was enacted in 1997, so these schools have been around for quite a while. 1999, lawmakers expanded the program, and today we have about 120,000 of Ohio's 1.7 million students are attending charter schools throughout the state. The schools receive about $1 billion in tax money. So that's the high level. Now we'll get into some of the more interesting nitty-gritty on this. I guess I want to start with who are the players, who's running charter schools, who sponsors them, who's involved in this in Ohio. Maybe Darlene want to start with that one?
I want to address a couple things that Cathy brought up, and again, it gets to be a little confusing. I think Ohio is unique. We're very unique in the charter sector as well. The reason why we're called community schools, our charter schools are called community schools in Ohio, is that private schools in Ohio have charters. So back when the law was developed in 1997, there was all this debate on, well, you can't call a charter school a private school because private schools have charter. Let's call them community schools. We're the only state in the union, Cathy is right, that calls them community schools. But it's what attracted me to the sector. The charter schools in Ohio are meant to be of the community. They are organic in the sense that they can bubble up from the community. The other piece I want to clarify is it's a little bit of a misnomer to call them privately run. They are a public school with a nonprofit board that holds that contract with the authorizer. So far, that's all very public. They run the public school. The board has the choice if it chooses. Not all of the community schools in Ohio do this, but the board can choose to hire an educational service provider, a private operator that runs the public school on behalf of that nonprofit board. I hope I haven't lost you in all that yet, but it's really important, step number one, to understand that charter/community schools, and maybe from this point on, let's call them charter schools. Charter schools in Ohio are public schools that have the same kind of laws for open admissions, public records laws, many of the same requirements as the traditional public. So folks like us up here, we call it traditional public and charter public schools. I hope that clarifies. Getting to Cathy's question, I hope it didn't take too long, but who runs all this? ODE, Ohio Department of Education, and wave your napkin if we use acronyms that you can't understand, because if you're in education, and Dr. Lowry's smiling because we've both been in education a very long time, we use a lot of acronyms. So Ohio Department of Education, better known as ODE, oversees all of it in the sense that it oversees the sponsor. One more time, we use two names. We call that entity an authorizer or a sponsor. You choose. We often up here call it sponsors. They are the regulator in the sense that they oversee the contract, negotiate that contract with the board. Sponsors do not run the schools. Some of us try to, but we've got to remember that autonomy is the promise. Accountability with autonomy to be very innovative. ODE over authorizer sponsors. Sponsors have a contract with a nonprofit board. The board runs the school, either itself or by hiring that operator, that third-party educational service provider.
So let me interrupt right here. When people talk about profit versus nonprofit, what kind of profit entities are involved in charter schools? And where is the involvement?
I don't want to.
You don't want to?
Aaron, you want to take that, and then I'll piggyback.
Yeah. So I guess, Darlene was absolutely, described the landscape and the governance structure of the charter school sector, absolutely accurately in the sense that, you have sponsors that are responsible for the accountability of the school. And that's a crucial key linchpin to the charter school sector and whether it's going to be successful or not. They're the ones that make the crucial decisions about which schools are allowed to open and educate students, which schools are not performing well and must be closed, for the public benefit and for ultimately the benefit of the kids that they're educating. So the sponsor level is incredibly crucial. That was a lot of what we saw in House Bill 2, which is the charter legislation that passed, and a lot of the reforms that we supported as an organization. To your question about for-profit and nonprofit operators, there's the opportunity, because charter schools are autonomous, have certain flexibilities, to enter into a third-party contract with an operator. That operator can be a nonprofit entity. A lot of our charter schools have a nonprofit operator. The KIPP schools are nonprofit entities. And then some of the schools, charter schools in Ohio, will contract with a for-profit entity. So about half the schools in charter schools in Ohio have some sort of management company or an operator, and the other schools in Ohio are what we kind of call mom and pop charter schools. And Tony can maybe talk about that a little bit more in terms of the operator and how the schools are actually managed.
We fit under the mom and pop category.
I want to, before you get into that, who starts schools in Ohio? Who are these people that are starting schools in Ohio?
So to answer
Here's
your
one.
first question and this question, educators do. So we run our school. We're educators. We're not business people. There are business aspects to what we do, but I would say, to your first question, who runs these schools? I would say educators run these schools, and that's who should be running schools. And I would also say that educators are the people that are starting the schools, and they see a need that's not being met in traditional public schools, and have an idea for, okay, I'm going to focus on this. In our case, it's arts integration, it's safety, it's inclusivity of all of our kids. It's making sure that there's no bullying. That's who starts schools.
Okay.
People with ideas and passion.
There's, if I may, on the who starts schools, again, another part of the confusion is that there is a broad spectrum of charter school types. They can be your typical, what we call brick and mortar. There's some of us that travel in the same age that we never thought we would call a school by the structure, brick and mortar. But brick and mortar means an actual school building. You can have a community group with a strong passion to have a school around something that's very important to them. And the community group can be comprised of leaders in the community. They come up with an idea. They might ask a national provider like KIPP to come to Ohio, and could you come to our community, because we believe in the no excuses model. We want to turn that around for our particular community. You can have the teachers bring together the group, and you can even have an operator come in that takes a look at Ohio and says, we think our model can make a difference for Cleveland. We think our model would fit really well in Toledo. I do want to let you all know that Ohio is the only state with charter schools where the law requires charter schools to be within the inner city urban 8. I didn't know that was unique until I started traveling throughout the country, just viewing other charter models. And our state created our law based around having charter schools in the inner city urban areas.
This might be a good time to get Tony to tell us a little bit about his school, and I guess what I'd like to know is what's different about a charter school versus if you're a parent and you want to, where should I send my kid to school? Should I send him down to the street to my traditional public, or should I send him to your charter school or some other charter school? What's going on different in your school? Tell us about your school.
In our school, we have a commitment to the arts, and I think that's unique among schools these days, especially in the testing environment. So we're committed to having a full dance program, a full theater program, visual arts, and music. And I think a lot of kids come to our school for those arts experiences. But then I think that also they're learning skills and like how to foster creativity and how to use their critical thinking skills that they can apply to their academic classes, because we also have a full academic curriculum with AP classes. We're preparing them for college at the same time that they're performing and they're being creative.
So the kids at your school come from where? You're located,
they come from all over.
East side.
Yeah, we're located on the east side, and I would say half of our kids come from the Columbus district, but the rest of our kids come from over 25 different districts that are surrounding us: Reynoldsburg, Whitehall, Groveport, and even as far out as some of the rural districts. And a lot of those kids are coming because they are not safe in their schools. A lot of our kids are LGBTQ kids, and they're not getting along in their schools, and they come to us and they have a safe space to grow and learn. Our kids are different, the different kid that really need a place to flourish and be themselves.
Can I say why I'm so proud of ACPA? We got federal funding, the school did, for a very important program. And the school's really humble about this. But this is very, very important to give a voice to the children that don't have voices, that may be bullied against. And I think it's just for a second or two, would you tell about this program? And I'm hopeful that this type of program grows nationally.
Yeah, thanks. We applied for a dissemination grant with the U.S. Department of Education 3 years ago, and the result is our Voice Project. So when we sat down to look at our report cards and our performance, and we've been high performing for years, the entire time that we've been open, we were like, why are we high performing? Let's examine this. And we attribute it to our climate and culture. So we believe that providing this space for the kids to learn that's safe and inclusive is why they're high performing. It's not that we are focused on test scores and we're doing rote learning. It's because the climate and culture is safe. So kids come, they're free, they're safe. So what we're doing with this grant is we're identifying how we make the climate and culture safe. So we've compiled all of our best practices, and we want to share it with other schools because we believe that it's one way that schools should be operating to be high performing, especially charter schools.
Well, you raise a good point, because going back 20 years when they enacted the charter school law here in Ohio, the idea at the time was for schools to be innovative and to maybe come up with best practices that could then be copied in the traditional public schools or other schools of any sort, really. What are some of the things you think that they've learned in Ohio over the last 20 years, and is anything being duplicated elsewhere? Any best practices, I suppose?
I have to be careful. I'm not allowed to have favorites. As the Ohio Alliance for Public Charter Schools, we have almost 300 school members, and we have a lot of associate members. But I want to shine the light on a young man that I get the privilege of going to his school as much as I can, and that's the United Schools Network. And I'm bringing United Schools Network up. If you've not had an opportunity, please visit these two schools to start out with. United Schools Network was one of those schools that started out with a very humble beginning. Maybe less than 100 students, 150 students in a church basement. If you don't know this about charter schools, we have to pick facilities that are sometimes strip malls or empty box stores or church basements, and we have to turn those schools into being school ready by law and by caring about the kids and wanting a safe environment. United Schools Network is one of those schools that has just started out as a little seed in a community that really had underperforming kids, and with such a small group, they hit success from the early launch. And now they have several schools, and I'm very proud to say that they're going to be opening another school. It is a no excuses model. It is a model that looks at the whole child. Andy Boy's going, I didn't know Darlene knew all that about United Schools Network, but he's up front if you have a chance afterwards. But it helps profile what charter schools in Ohio and nationally are all about. You have a passion, you have an idea to make a difference for children. You launch that idea with some good regulations and requirements and guidelines. If it connects to the students and it connects to the communities, then you can expand and replicate. Both of our schools that we've been talking about are high performing, and we're very proud of them in the state.
So I guess I should so what about all these headlines you've been reading about crappy schools and scandals and charter schools and such? Maybe we should address a little bit of that as well today. And I'll pick on Fordham. I warned Aaron I was going to pick on him a little bit. But we recently wrote about a report that the Fordham Foundation commissioned that showed charter school students on average in Ohio received 14 fewer days of learning and reading and 43 fewer days in math when compared to kids in traditional public schools. And then more recently, there was a report about the eSchool charter schools, and in that report, it was suggested, and that included Ohio and several other states, it was suggested that students in those in the online schools lost up to a year of learning. That sounds like a problem to me. What can we do? I mean, what should be done about that? If Ohio's got this accountability system, how is that allowed to happen? Are schools being shut down? What's going on?
So the results, vary very significantly from school to school. There are some, outstanding schools in Columbus that are charters, in Cleveland, Dayton, Cincinnati. You go to any of the cities in Ohio, and they're high-performing charter schools. We talked about two of them already today. Absolutely, like Darlene said, encourage anybody to go out there and support schools like that, invest in them, volunteer. We have We need board members. We need people that, can invest in the community and start new schools and replicate high performers. There are, on the other hand, schools that struggle mightily to educate the students in their schools. A lot of them are charters, a lot of them are district schools. We haven't figured out the silver bullet for how to educate kids who are coming to school with disadvantages. If we've figured it out, none of us would probably be here. So there are schools in both sectors that are having difficulty educating students and giving them a year's worth of growth, if not more, which is what they deserve and need to succeed in college and career. And we need to set high standards for schools, especially charters, that the expectation should be, look, we're going to get you to the next level, to the next step in your life, whether that's going to a high-performing high school, if you're a charter middle school, preparing them adequately so that they can succeed in high school. If you're a charter high school, like Tony's school is, it's to take the next step to college. And, when we look at the hard data and the hard results, that's what matters most when it comes to accountability. Those reports shed some light in terms of some of the variation across schools, and then as a whole, some of the disappointing results we've seen in Ohio. And that is part of the reason why we put into place some tougher regulations, especially on the charter sponsors, where a lot more is going to be expected of them in the coming years.
I think, are you referring to House Bill 2?
House Bill 2.
Okay, the legislature just passed legislation, House Bill 2, that's, the goal is to make charter schools more accountable, and I think to shut down poor performing schools. Can somebody tell me a little bit about what that bill is going to do and how they think things will look a year out from now? What's going to be different?
3 words. You ready? Responsibility, accountability, and transparency. Responsibility has got to do with the roles the various entities play in the charter school sector. ODE, sponsors, authorizers, boards, and if they choose to hire an operator, that operator management company. Those are the 4 roles. In the world of transparency, it's about taking already existing best practices and codifying them, such as making sure that you have a policy for conflict of resolution, that you make sure that our boards and our school leaders understand open records law, the Sunshine Law. If it's required, let's make sure they understand it. Making sure that the sponsor authorizer is able to say how they spend that authorizer fee in a report to ODE. Having ODE with that operator management company, if there is one for that school, to be able to do a report on performance. So the responsibility, the transparency, and the accountability, just clarifying that when you have a role, who's accountable for what, and the expectations of that accountability. So it took a look at the whole structure. We're being told here in Ohio that House Bill 2 is one of the most comprehensive reform bills nationally. In case you didn't know this, Governor Kasich signed it on November 1. It takes 90 days before it turns into law, which will be the first of the year. And we, and I hope you too, are very hopeful that we're given the time to implement it and that the implementation is as powerful as the promise House Bill 2 has.
Aaron, what do you expect the fallout will be? Do you think there'll be schools that close? A lot of pro-charter school groups have said it's past time to get rid of some of the bad apples.
Yeah, I think it puts in incentives for the sponsors, for the school boards, the charter school boards. It establishes some incentives to do the right things for the kids who are in those schools, whether it means sanctioning a school if you're a sponsor for poor performance and sort of putting them on alert, like, hey, you need to improve the achievement and the outcomes of the kids. It's urgent. It's something that needs to happen, up to closing the school if that is what is required. It puts more of the responsibility and the burden on the school boards to be in charge of the school. As Darlene said, they are the ones that are have the responsibility of managing that school and overseeing the senior administration. So they're the ones who should be in charge of the school. So it puts into place a lot of the responsibilities and expectations for what what is going to be expected of the charter sector. So I think it sets a framework that is a good foundation so that we can be confident that we're replicating good schools and that the schools that aren't performing well eventually that we make room for the high performers and shut down the low ones.
Okay. I also wanted to mention Ohio just won a $71 million federal grant for charter schools to open new schools, new high-performing schools. And I want, Tony, maybe you've already opened your school, but maybe you can talk a little bit about what this grant's going to do to help others like you who may be interested in starting schools.
Well, I think that it's available for schools that are high-performing and that want to replicate or expand, excuse me, in grade levels. And I think with funding that is less typically when you're open, that's going to help schools get off the ground and give them a couple years to get on their feet and plan and really look at models that are successful to open the new schools so they're not just going in and, you know, opening a school that's going to fail right away, which that does happen. And I think also earlier I was thinking about just funding in general, and some of the schools that are closing, we do operate on less money, and it does make it difficult to attract and retain the teachers, the good teachers that kids need. And I think that's one reason why schools close, that they're not performing as well because they are not able to pay their teachers or their leaders. But I think that grant's great for Ohio. I think when you're looking at competitive charter school world and opening new schools, you do need to look at the ones that are already performing, and they should be replicating.
Now, when you opened your school, how'd you pay for it? Because you don't start to get your per pupil funding until just right before the school starts.
We had that grant.
You had a grant, a federal grant, and what kind of things did that pay for?
Planning, so personnel, it paid for the teachers, it paid for the technology, the furniture, everything that basically that's inside the school, not the facility.
Okay.
The CSP grant, Charter School Program Grant, was in Ohio till around 2009, and Ohio lost the grant at that time, didn't get the application accepted. So Ohio has been without the Charter School Program Grant for almost 5 years. That's why some of us were so surprised that people were against, and it's actually 32 million, 32.5 million, and the 71 maybe, if you do it right, over 3, 4, 5 years. So the grant is actually 32.5. That why wouldn't we want, in Ohio, federal money to go to quality performing charter schools and have that federal money flow to Ohio? So we were a bit surprised that there was so much opposition to it. But we certainly understand that there was also controversy going on. But we want all of you to just reach out there and understand the Charter School Program Grant for startup, for dissemination, for replication. And it's meant and designed to go to performing schools.
I think the startup phase is crucial, and I'm very excited about the opportunities with the federal, CSP grant, and I think it's just getting a school off to a good start, and especially financially, is such a key phase in the life cycle of a school. So,
I just want to remind the audience we're going to take questions in a few minutes, so if you have any, you can get them ready. Talking about, and by the way, the controversy you're talking about are the sponsor evaluations that were done at the Department of Education that were found to have been done not accurately, boosted the ratings of some of the sponsors, and kind of cast some doubt on what the department was doing in terms of oversight. So they're looking to fix that up and then get the money from this grant flowing to schools, to new schools. Talking about funding, traditional public schools have long complained that they send, the way the funding works is they say they send more money per pupil to the charter school than what they get from the state in per pupil funding. So, now I didn't think of this, but I hear people saying it seems kind of reasonable. Why don't we just direct fund charter schools from the state budget rather than deduct it from the public school where the student comes from? What do you think of that idea?
If it means more money, I'm all for it.
Spoken like a true school leader. I'm as traditional district as I am charter school. I've been in education 44 years. As I look out into the audience, I don't know if school funding straight across the board is the best that we can make it. How about all you? If you're in the community and you're levy weary, and you get told you're going to lose your buses, your kids are going to pay for their cheerleading uniforms. I go back to growing up going, when did this all change? When did funding get so complex? What is all this mix now? That's traditional district I just spoke of. And so then insert community schools and charter schools into an already totally confusing funding system. I would like to toss out there, let's just take a look at school funding. Let's, as a community, a group of parents, traditional or charter, say, how can we make sure that our most precious belonging in our entire lives, our kids, get quality education, and that we pay who we entrust those kids to, teachers, whether in traditional district or charter. It is said by outside resources, University of Arkansas did a study. We didn't pay for it, we didn't sponsor it, and they said that Ohio charter schools are 22% less funded. If any of you want to find that study, it's on the OAPCS website in our resources. Take a look at that study. Charter schools are 2/3 funded, but you have to remember when the charter school law was first developed, I think someone said charter schools can do it for less. What does that mean?
I remember that.
Kathy was there.
They did say that.
You can also look at those payment reports on ODE's website, so you can see the funds being transferred per district. And
So
it's not, I don't know why it's so confusing,
So
to
I
be
guess
honest.
the question is, how much less, and what did that mean? And facilities, there is no facilities funding except for very meager per pupil facilities funding. And so the operating dollars for charter schools, whether or not it's less, but the operating dollars for charter schools goes to facilities up to 19% in some cases, where when you go to traditional districts, there's a separate facilities commission. When you start talking about all these dynamics, my staff, I can imagine what you're thinking, goes, Darlene, you're getting into the weeds, you've lost me. So I think it's really important that as a community, as a group of folks, we believe in our kids. We believe in our parents choosing traditional district or charter. We believe that we should fund quality education. We need to pay our teachers more, and we need to figure out how it all works and really be able to explain it to the public yourself.
I would just add that in the urban areas.
Aaron, while you're talking,
sorry.
if anyone has questions and want to step up, and when Aaron's done, I'm going to start taking questions.
I'll be short, but
No, take your time, but I just want to.
the funding disparity in the urban districts in Ohio is actually larger than 22% shortfall statewide. So in a city like Columbus, the district kids on a per pupil basis are at about $14,000. And on average for a charter student in the city of Columbus, it's about $8,500 per student, not including like special needs sort of categorical increases. But for an average student, it's quite significant, the funding difference.
You know, if nothing else, it would just be nice if they could simplify it so we could see.
That would be nice too.
See exactly what. All right, now it's time, as been as a CMC's tradition, to take questions from the audience, and it looks like we have a few. If you could just identify yourself and your affiliation, if you'd like, have at.
Sure. My name is Andrew Dodson. I'm here with Triad Architects, and so I've got a facilities question, believe it or not. And you touched on it a little since I walked up here, but it was pretty quick, so I want to ask again. You're saying there's $32 million coming from the feds for charter schools, and that's not related to facilities, right?
It's called the Charter School Program.
Okay.
And so it can be used for facilities.
Sure.
It's not designated
Right.
straight for that.
I guess my question is more about scale, and it's that, having a very small amount of knowledge about the budgets of these things. I mean, an average suburban high school can cost anywhere from $30 to $50 million in one high school in the facilities, just the facilities. And so from your guys' perspective, is $32 million, I mean, that sounds like a drop in the bucket to me. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that as my question. Is that enough? Is that, what can you really do statewide with $32 million?
We would like more. Would you like to come with me to Washington? I don't know about all of you. I like to see a collaboration. And I didn't put the CSP together. I do travel to Washington. I do hope for federal money for our states. We need it. We deserve it. I like to see the flow to Ohio. I think the state deserves it, and we haven't had it for 5 years.
Didn't the department kind of lay out how they were going to distribute the money in their grant request, like to so many schools per year? It's not intended to.
Don't let me.
Competitive. How do you finance facilities in general when these numbers are, the scale seems so incredibly order of magnitude different to me personally? That's kind of my question.
I don't want to miss any other questions, so I'm going to just take is 32.5 million enough? The collaboration is maybe it's seed money, and if we can take some federal money and some state money, and maybe that $25 million facilities grant from the state that came through with the budget, and we can do a magic mix. Maybe no one entity is floating all the funding. And then maybe some of the private investors see public money and can coalesce with that and collaborate with that. So the average capital cost, the charter schools are telling us, is a minimum of $525,000. $525,000 just for expansion, and that's just, I'm looking at Andy and he's going, Darlene, that's a drop in the bucket. So truly, it's more seed money. Now I want to address Cathy's question about, didn't the CSP grant get totally laid out? It didn't say X amount of dollars here, X amount of dollars there. It said, give us this money, and we would like it for startup. We would like it for dissemination of best practices, maybe helping what United Schools Network, DECA, does in expanding that. And then it was also for an investment of some sort into the Youngstown Recovery District, but we don't know what that meant. So the money wasn't designated, but the application went across those 3 categories. Does that help?
Good luck. We'll take the next question.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. I'm owner of Regionomics, and I have a very non-economics question, primarily for Tony. I have a very intelligent grandson who I think would totally thrive in a school like yours. So what would be the process for getting in? What's the acceptance rate? What criteria do you look at?
Well, we're public, so I'll just give you my card, and he should do an application and do a tour and enroll.
I will piggyback to that. Any charter school has an open admissions process. You have to pick up an application. You have to have the same kind of documentation. You have to go through that you would in a traditional district if you happen to move to a different district. So again, he didn't go through all of it, but the admissions process is very open.
And we do have a pretty unique touring process that they'll come out, spend an hour or 2 with our enrollment director and get to know the school and see everything that's going on. It's a fun tour.
Hi, my name is Warren Fishman, and I thank you so much for coming. This has been very enjoyable and very informative. We've talked a lot about high-performing charter schools, and you said, I think, that we've had them in Ohio since the 90s. Is that correct?
1997 in the pilot district of Toledo, Lucas County. Okay. 1997, they were launched there.
So I'm sure we have statistics. Statistically, how many kids from charter schools and community schools go on to college and graduate compared to kids in public schools? Do we have a number?
You want to go ahead on yours? Well, statistically, it depends on the school. The school right now, and remember there's about 400 charter schools, and they're not all K-12.
Right.
Typically, they're K-8, and so that number is a little harder to track if you only go up to 8th grade, but even the K-8s are trying to do a better job of tracking the charter school student all the way, even if they go to a different school. I think what would be interesting is to be able to publish those numbers a little bit more transparency. with more transparency and get it out to the public. They are being tracked. They're not easy numbers to find. And as an audience, just understand that your charter schools are not K-12. A large section of them are K-8. But I still think that number is important all the way.
The other thing about college is that our kids are predominantly urban kids, and so the expense of college is a very difficult. So we can look at them going to college and track their applications and their enrollment, but then once, like, being able to sustain staying for 4 years is very difficult for a lot of our kids, and that is something that I feel we need to be working on as a movement.
Yeah, well, K through 8 is still a very formative time for kids,
it is.
and so it's an important time, and I would just be curious to know how many of the kids, when either K-8 or through high school, compared to the general population, even in their areas, how many went on to further education and graduated.
That information is on the school report cards, isn't it?
It is now.
It is now. So
but they've been around since the 90s, and that's what I'm kind of curious. You've been talking about high-performing ones, and I'm sure yours are high-performing, but there's a lot. How many schools do we have in Ohio now?
Charter schools?
Yeah, charter schools.
400.
400.
We're 7% of the student population in Ohio. 7% charter students in the state of Ohio for all K-12 enrolled students.
Yeah, it seems like that'd be an easy number to track then with only 400. I'd just like to see, that would be interesting to see that number to be able to support charter schools.
The state doesn't collect the post-secondary data and link it back to the high schools as of right now. So on the school report cards, you don't see the college-going rates of any particular school in Ohio.
You see college ready.
Right.
So for traditional district and/or charter, obviously the state agrees with the gentleman, and the new report card is going to start tracking it. Some of our schools track it individually, but just like any other kind of statistic, if you don't have it in one place, it's hard to do comparative analysis, isn't it? So in that new report card, and each year there's been new metrics brought into it, that is something that you'll want to go look at, and every school will have to have it available.
The report cards are posted on the Department of Education's website. I'm not going to say that they're easy to find, but you can go on there and find them.
If you can't find the local report cards, if you'll reach out to OAPCS, we'll be glad to link you. We believe in all public schools. But if you have the particular charter school question, we'll do our very best to answer that for you.
Next.
Hi, I'm Margie Pizzuti. I'm CEO of Goodwill Columbus. I'm also a 12-year member of the Upper Arlington Board of Education. I tell folks that I count them in dog years. I've actually served for 42 years on the Upper Arlington Board of Education.
That means I've been in education 150 years.
Yeah. So just do the multiplication. I'd like to ask you, thank you again for being here as well. I'd like to ask your perspective on a slightly different slice of the charter school infrastructure in our state. And those are adult high schools, and they are charter schools. They focus in on oftentimes populations of what we call youth opportunity, 16 to 24-year-olds who aged out of foster care, have not gotten their high school diploma. This is not a GED. It's a high school diploma, and sometimes training certifications that really put them on a pathway to employment. Can you talk a little bit about, in Ohio, I think there may have been some provisions in House Bill 2 about those adult high schools. Can you talk a little bit about those and what we're doing in Ohio around that?
You weigh in. This is the first time I've heard them called adult high schools. We call them dropout recovery.
Doesn't adult high school sound a lot better?
Yeah, you know, if you...
I like, yeah, I think you should go with adult high school.
Some of our dropout recovery have 16-year-olds in them. I don't know if we call adults 16 yet, but irregardless, the dropout recovery, which you call adult schools, there's about 89. Let's just say there's about 90 of the 400 charter schools that fall into that category. The state itself, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, got a group of charter school stakeholders together and said, what is fair in accountability to measure the performance of dropout recovery? How do you take someone that may have dropped out once, twice, 3, 4 times, has a family, maybe juggling a job, transportation, while they would prefer not a GED, although that's important, they want that high school degree. How do you recover those credits? How do you measure performance in that? And there's just been put together a dropout recovery school accountability report card. It's going to be launched. I don't think it's been launched yet on what performance is expected. But I am a believer in the dropout recovery. You all know that if you shut the door on education, you could potentially open a jail door, right? Or you could potentially open the inability to have a livelihood the rest of your adult life. Education is the ticket. I believe in that.
I think there's also, I think the Department of Education just this week announced a plan to do some high school diploma work or certification through the community colleges. I'm not real familiar with it. That's about all I can say about it, but thanks for the question. Next question, please.
I'm John Lowe. I worked in higher education for 40 years. Did you say $1 billion spent in tax dollars?
Yes.
And that's for 7% of the students in Ohio, right?
Yes.
Okay. I've lived in Chicago and Mississippi and Arkansas where there were dual systems, and they were inevitably more expensive because, you know, you're funding at least 2 or 3 different kinds of systems. How is that going to work here? How are we not going to have a dual system that'll simply be more expensive than what we've had in the past?
Aaron, can you?
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's important to, you know, put the $1 billion into perspective in the sense that it's going to educate kids. So, you know, divide that by 120,000 kids and, you know, I don't know, do the long division and figure it out. It's like, you know, as I said, it's like $8,500 or, you know, $9,000 a people. So, you know, it is going to educate kids. It's not going to, you know, educate, you know, trees or buildings or whatever. It's for kids.
And that $1 billion, I've not seen it sliced and diced, but I think it is a composite of foundation, state foundation money, and federal flow-through money for special education and parity aid and other types of categorical funding that got all thrown into this $1 billion bucket. I don't know that for sure because someone's not laid it out to me, because when I do my math with state foundation money, it doesn't equal $1 billion. So you have to understand that when you say $1 billion, is that foundation money? Is that federal money? Is that money that should follow the child? What is that money? And again, I want to apologize on the behalf of all of us. The funding is very complex and very hard to follow.
But you're looking for a feasibility study, it sounds like, that would show what it takes to run 2 systems versus 1, or?
Do you provide special education services in the charter schools?
It's mandatory by law, and more importantly, I just hope we do it because it should be done. It is required.
Thank you.
My name is Jim Cowarden. I've developed 3 charter schools myself and have helped companies develop others. I have a question, a big question, for the attorneys in the room. Which one is going to take up the fact that a public school child goes to school, I think it's more like half the funding than 2/3 of the funding, and the kid next door goes to school for twice that much money in the public school system. If that's not unconstitutional, I don't know what a constitution is. Now, maybe I don't know what a constitution is, but I think that ought to be looked at by the Supreme Court. But I have a question, and maybe that you could help me with. I'm confused by the CSP grant. You're saying that the grant is for schools that are high performing, and yet they're startup schools.
To replicate.
Pardon?
To replicate their model and open a new school.
So we're only going to start schools that replicate other schools? We're not going to start schools that are creative and have new programs? And
that's in there too.
So it's both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jim, I could invent it and do it my style. It's not, the application criteria has not been written. The overall arching plan was the proposal. The criteria of how you access the startup, the replication, or the dissemination has to be built by ODE in, I think they're going to be collaborating with US DOE to see how we distribute this money. It's not been totally decided upon yet. You can start up a high-performing model if you have information about that model and it's been successful in other places. You can make it be a high-performing model saying, I've done it other places and this is the new model here. But to be very fair, we're getting some waving arms, and I think we may have to give it back to Cathy.
Just one more thing. We were one day away from sending in an application for startup funds to the federal government, and the state got funding.
Correct.
You can't apply to the feds if the state has funding.
Correct.
Now the state's funding is delayed.
Yes. Correct.
And so
You gotta wait.
what do we do? Is there anything we can do?
Call me.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I'll do my best to help.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Trip Lazarus, and the thing I try to wrap my head around is I see these amazing charter schools like United Schools Network and KIPP and Graham School that are
ACVA?
operating, yes, and I'm not as familiar there, and I'm sure I would be very impressed.
I'm out for a tour.
But, and operating on not only non-break-even level, but they take donations. And so can somebody explain to me how there is any profit in any of this education for anybody to skim off? And what I mean, it just sets up a very strange loop of people skimming off profit from our education system, sending it back to the legislators and influencing them to keep them in business. And it doesn't make sense to me. Maybe you can explain it to me.
It doesn't make sense to me either, because the money should be going to the kid, and that's the bottom line.
Well, there are for-profit management companies that, you don't know what they make exactly, but that make money off their management services. That we've written a lot at the Dispatch about management companies that lease back facilities to subsidiaries and make money that way. So there are ways, but it's probably not happening at your school.
No.
I think you have to understand that all of your school systems, traditional public, charter schools, I'm guessing private, they all have their lobbyists. Education somewhere along the line, I can't tell you when, got very politicized. It just is, but it's not particular to just the charter sector.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're done, but I think I need Mo back up. Oh, you're already here.
Oh, look how good I am. Let's thank this panel again. Cathy Candisky, Tony Gatto, Darlene Chambers, and Aaron Churchill. Thank you guys so much for being here. I think we can safely say this is a to-be-continued conversation. As with all of our forums, we invite you to view and share our information online. They are replayed on WOSU through PBS affiliates throughout the state, through the HOW channel, on Columbus Television, and always available via CMC's website on our YouTube channel. Thanks again to our sponsor today, the Columbus Dispatch, and for all of you for being here. You may continue the conversation out in the lobby over coffee and cookies. We'll see you next week.